Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the official podcast from MCUExchange.com. I'm Cooper Hood, one of the lead news writers for the MCUExchange.com, and joining me today is Rhiannon.
Hey guys.
Brendan.
Hello.
Sorry to cut you out there, Rhiannon.
No, it's fine.
Ben.
Hey.
And Doug.
Hey everybody.
So most of you will know Doug from the MCU Exchange show on YouTube. So glad to have him, plus Brendan and Ben, some of the newer members to our team. Hop on for this post Comic-Con week episode. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff that came out, like Captain Marvel stuff, Black Panther, Avengers, just really a lot. And we're going to start with, there's been some talk about a Marvel Cinematic Multiverse of sorts, with director Scott Derrickson telling comicbook.com that Doctor Strange is the start of the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. Brendan, what do you think this could mean, really?
Well, it could mean a lot of different things. It's strange that they decided on Doctor Strange being the window into that, because I've talked a little about this in a couple of articles I've written recently, but the sort of other dimensions that show up in Doctor Strange comics are not really, the traditional alternate or parallel universe where, there's another copy of you and everything looks similar but a little bit different. It's usually more surreal. You get a bunch of abstract shapes, a bunch of cosmic stars and planets and nebula and whatnot. And everything they've shown in the trailers so far has been a lot of, different cities and slightly different versions, it seems, of the MCU universe itself. So they're going with the more traditional parallel universe idea. So I'm not sure exactly where they're going to go, because, of course, the Marvel comics have a lot of different variant universes that they explore. The movies, I think, of course, the Doctor Strange movies will, to some extent, keep to the ideas from the comics there, where it's more about extra-dimensional spaces with these weird monsters and entities that cause trouble for Doctor Strange. And then there might be a little bit of stuff on the side about parallel realities. I think that probably we'll see more of that in Infinity War, and then they might play with it more going on beyond that. But I don't know. It seems more like they're just opening up the door to the possibility of other realities. But I'm not 100% expecting the Doctor Strange movies to do too much with the concept.
So do you think that, when I hear the word multiverse, the first thing I kind of thought of was, does this mean that this is how they would incorporate a Fantastic Four into the universe, or do if Fox ever gives the rights back to X-Men, or they want to do some type of share deal or something, is that how they bring this in, or is this an avenue to reboot new characters? So once, a Robert Downey Jr. doesn't want to do Iron Man anymore, but they still want to have Tony Stark, they bring in a Tony Stark from a alternate universe type of thing? Is that what some of the rest of you guys might be thinking with this?
I think that could be one option that they could go with, but I don't necessarily think that that's the most likely option. And I think introducing the multiverse, I think it's possible that we might be reading a little bit more into it than they intend, because even in the first trailer, when the Ancient One's talking about your world is just one of many, I think these are basically similar dimensions folded on top of each other. I don't think we're going to spend any extended period of time in any of them other than the one that we know as the real world in the MCU.
Right. Ben or Rhiannon, where do you guys want to go next with this?
Myself personally, I'm not as much into the comic book side of this as I'm sure you guys are, but I like the idea of a multiverse within the MCU. I don't know about starting it in Doctor Strange. I kind of figured, they've been hinting at it with that scene from Ant-Man, and since Doctor Strange, they said that's sort of like that scene from Ant-Man. I guess it sort of makes sense, and I'll be excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have any very strong feelings either way. This is one, when it comes to Strange and where we're headed for Infinity War, I'm just going to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brendan is definitely the resident Doctor Strange expert on this podcast episode.
Oh. I'm just hoping that they give us a glimpse of Howard the Duck's world at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen him already, so anything is possible.
Exactly.
Moving on to Captain Marvel news. We finally got the announcement that Brie Larson is officially Captain Marvel. It's been rumored for a while, and a lot of us have been kind of speculating that she may be appearing, that she would likely appear prior to her solo movie. But apparently that's not going to be the case, or that's not the plan currently, as Kevin Feige told Coming Soon, that Brie Larson's not expected to debut before Captain Marvel, unless, quote, she does. So Rhiannon, as the only female perspective on this podcast, do you want to wait till 2019 to see Brie Larson?
Well, I mean, this is one where Marvel is sort of behind DC, as far as DC having some strong women coming forward in the near future. So I wouldn't be really surprised if Marvel tried to get her in a little bit earlier. Or maybe it is those side characters. There's a lot of strong women in the MCU. To me, I don't have strong feelings that they all need to be the lead. I feel that having a villain in Ragnarok, I feel that having, yes, Black Widow hasn't had her own movie, but she has been a strong character in the universe. We have Jessica Jones, not in the movies, but she has a pretty awesome TV show. Right. So yeah, I'm fine waiting till 2019 if that's what it takes for her to be what she needs to be.
So with this, possibility of not seeing her till her solo movie, do you guys think we meet her, in the coma, or do we meet her prior to so, and then maybe her solo movie is that journey of her learning about her powers, or do you think we start her solo movie off and she already has those established without learning about her origin?
I think after seeing how well introducing Black Panther and Spider-Man worked in Civil War, both of those characters totally had their origin stories very quickly told, not even for Spider-Man. All the early character setup stuff that had to be done got done in very, very brief scenes, so that by the time their solo movie comes out, it can just be, they don't have to waste any time on an origin story. So I find it a little hard to believe that we won't see Carol Danvers in some way, shape, or form before her own solo movie. Especially since she was in early drafts of Age of Ultron. It just seems to make sense that they want her to show up as soon as possible. So while we might not see Captain Marvel before her own movie, I think we will see Carol Danvers in some way, so that by the time her solo movie starts, she'll have her powers.
Right, and I think that was kind of the common thought process, and maybe this changes with the story we get to a little later about the Avengers titles changing, presumably. But I find it hard to believe that they would, announce the Brie Larson casting now and then be like, but you have to wait 3 years to see her on screen. I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint where exactly she fits before putting her in Avengers Infinity War, but I can't see them holding off until 2019. So that's Captain Marvel coverage. And then one of the other big, anticipated movies of, this Phase 3 slate is Black Panther. Mostly because of just how great he was in Civil War, but also because people are just itching for more diverse superhero-led films, and Black Panther is going to provide that with a large majority of the cast being African American, and one of the latest additions was Lupita Nyong'o, and she may have revealed our first kind of unofficial synopsis for the movie while speaking to Newsarama after the panel. She said, quote, the story of this Black Panther, what I'm allowed to say is that Black Panther's leadership has been threatened by two foes who come together, and so Black Panther gets the help of CIA and the Dora Milaje to try and defeat the enemy. So we know that Michael B. Jordan as Eric Killmonger will be one of those two threats. Any guesses on who the other one's going to be?
Well, the popular thought is Claw from
Right.
Age of Ultron.
I mean, is there any possibility that it's not Claw?
Sure, there's a possibility.
But I think we
Very, very slim possibility.
Right. So this kind of plays into more of almost a more global aspect to the movie, with the CIA getting involved. But it also has those elements of, the inner turmoil going on in Wakanda, post Civil War and everything. So with this, kind of early basis of a plot for this movie, is this what you guys want to see from Black Panther? Or we'll start with Ben, I guess, and then go to Doug and then Brendan and then Rhiannon. Or do you guys want to see something else from the plot of this movie?
I don't really know what to expect from the movie personally. After seeing him in Black Panther, I mean, in Civil War, I want to just see more of him in action, and I feel like this would provide a pretty good story. If maybe, I don't know, maybe just having an two villains in the same movie, that always kind of makes me a little nervous for what the outcome's going to be, because it doesn't always work out right. That would probably be the only thing that makes me nervous about it. But otherwise, I like it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what I want out of a Black Panther movie. It's got him as a new king, his rule being threatened. If the villains are Killmonger and Claw, I think it'll be cool to see them work together. I'm excited for this movie all around.
Brendan?
What I think is interesting about that summary is it seems like it's sort of a combination of two different Black Panther stories from the comics. There's sort of the very early one, Panther's Rage, from the old Jungle Action series, and then there's another one from the more modern era by Christopher Priest. And it seems like they've just sort of melded the two of them together, which makes a certain amount of sense. Those are two of the most well-known Black Panther stories. So in terms of, what I'd expect from a Black Panther movie, those both fit in there. What's interesting is that while Killmonger was the villain in one of those stories, the other one didn't have a villain who's been cast for this movie so far. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what elements they pull and which ones they leave out.
And I'm just generally excited. Yeah, this is, again, a situation where I'm excited to see whatever they bring to us. I don't know much about Black Panther. I'm going to read up on it as we get closer. And but everything about Wakanda so far has been really exciting. I've enjoyed getting to know Wakanda and the universe there. So I don't have strong feelings about the villains in general. Just the plot sounded interesting.
Right. And I don't know how many of you guys are reading Coates' run right now on Black Panther, but it kind of, has hints of this, this struggle that, T'Challa's having of, balancing, not only being a hero, but being a king of Wakanda and, maintaining control of his kingdom. So I'm really hoping that's something that is kind of played into in his solo movie. But as far as, this plot goes, I think you almost have to put Claw in there, because otherwise his introduction in Age of Ultron is just kind of wasted. Because let's face it, if he's not in Black Panther, I mean, there's no really rational place to put Claw in the rest of Phase 3, and then that's a whole chunk of Age of Ultron that's kind of wasted with that side story.
No, it's true, and especially it would be such a waste, because Claw is a character who in the comics eventually becomes this weird energy being, and why else cast Andy Serkis for a role that would probably need some sort of motion capture? It seems like they would have put some thought into that beforehand, just with that casting.
Do you think that's maybe something where that's kind of a tease at the end of the movie, as he becomes kind of that other worldly being type of thing instead of being, a more grounded character. He becomes that, that spirit, that energy type of thing instead for a possible sequel.
It's possible. I think the real question is, if he's in the movie, is how big is his role in the movie? Because if they did have any other villain in there, I could see it being one of the Dora Milaje. In the original Panther's Rage storyline, Eric Killmonger's the main villain, but he also has a female accomplice. And then in a later story, the Dora Milaje character they cast for this movie is one who went evil and became a villain later on. So I could see them maybe combining those two into something of a MCU composite character, and then maybe having Claw as just sort of a third ancillary villain who maybe, helps enable the two bigger ones. So if that were the case, yeah, then maybe he has a small role, and at the end of the movie they tease him becoming the bigger villain for the sequel.
Right. And, I would like to think that maybe Michael B. Jordan could stick around and not be a one presence, one appearance and then be done type of villain. But we don't really have that much faith in that probably not being the case, as much as, I think we would all agree that Michael B. Jordan staying around as long as possible is probably what we want. So we talked about, or we teased it a little earlier about the Avengers Infinity War has officially gotten a retitle, with part 1 now being just Avengers Infinity War, and what used to be Avengers Infinity War part 2 is now simply Untitled Avengers. So I know for me, and I think a lot of other people, the common thought was that Avengers Infinity War part 2 would stick with the Infinity War, subtitle, and that part 1 would get the different one. So now that we're having seemingly the war in part 1, do you guys have any ideas on what we could possibly see in part 2?
The first thing that popped into my head was introducing people to a new team, because obviously Infinity War is going to affect a lot of what we know as the MCU right now. So I would think the second one is kind of just like a quick introduction to whoever is going to make up the new team if they decide to go that route.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was that was the same direction I was thinking, that they would be moving into whatever's next.
Yeah, I agree. I have absolutely no idea where it could go, but whatever it is going to give us a lot of hints as to where Phase 4 will lead.
I think what's interesting about it is there's a big question of like how much time is going to be between these two movies, because they've got, of course, Captain Marvel coming out sandwiched in between them, which also sort of plays into the question of when are we going to see Captain Marvel for the first time.
Right.
I think it's possible the first movie might set up some big calamity and maybe not end on a cliffhanger, but end on a pretty big game-changing event, and then the movies in between sort of pick up where that left off, and then the next one, the second of the movies, because they have said that even if the titles are changing, they're still sort of interconnected, and they're shooting them at sort of back to back, I believe, and maybe they'll have just the Captain Marvel movie as sort of a bridger between these two connected but separate stories.
Right, and it's not just Captain Marvel, it's also Ant-Man and the Wasp, I believe, is
right.
the movie that follows what is now Infinity War.
That seems like such a strange choice to put between them.
Right.
Well, I could see a way that would make sense, because I don't want to drop any potential spoilers here, but in the Infinity Gauntlet comic, there's a pretty disastrous battle for the heroes. So I could see maybe the first movie ending with the heroes seemingly dead or lost or something like that. And then you have these two movies in between that are about, slightly lesser known heroes who maybe didn't play as big a role in the first movie. And then maybe in the next of these two Avengers movies, they could have those lesser heroes have to band together and find out what happened to the old guard and because that's been a recurring theme in a lot of Avengers comics of, there's the mythic founding group, and then there's these poor schlubs who have to come in and try and pick up the pieces and try and live up to the title of Earth's mightiest heroes. There's a lot of stuff about legacy in the comics for the Avengers.
Right, and I think there was a rumor a while back about that, Avengers 3, which is now Avengers Infinity War, would feature it's kind of the flip of what you're saying, Brendan, where it'd be the new heroes like the Doctor Stranges and everything. It'd be them battling Thanos, and then they lose or something, and then part 2, or what is now Untitled Avengers, would feature, the original Avengers coming back. It'd have Iron Man come back, Cap and his Secret Avengers, something come out of the shadows. That's where maybe Hulk and Thor could pop in. But yeah, I don't know how this, how these two movies play together so well, but then there's also 2 movies in between with Ant-Man, who, the first one was so, such a small story, and for the sequel to possibly go larger and be about trying to find, Hank Pym's wife and everything, and then Captain Marvel being about her origin. I'm not sure how those 2 movies exactly fit within a story about Thanos and an Infinity War, and then a follow-up that also features Thanos and probably a lot more bad stuff.
Yeah, that's the only reason I think it would be the reverse of that rumor, because a power vacuum being created in the first movie sets up a lot more drama, and then it allows for a time gap where, you have these 2 movies in between, and everybody's wondering, where did the old heroes go, and nobody's sure, and you've got a little bit of time for that to sort of unfold, and then that power vacuum has to be filled when Thanos rears his head again in the next movie.
Right. So, any other thoughts on Avengers, or maybe some possible titles you guys are thinking of for Avengers 4?
I got nothing.
Avengers 4, Electric Boogaloo.
I was actually going to say that. I was trying to come up with a way. Avengers 4, we get a bunch more. Yeah.
Something totally ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I've seen people speculate it could be like Avengers World War Hulk or Avengers Secret Invasion, and I don't see how either of those tie into the first one at all.
I think the most puzzling thing about it is the character of Thanos, because he's a really complicated character who's got a lot of weird stuff going on about him, and they're going to need not only a lot of time in these movies to deal with all these characters, but also to unpack who he is and what his deal is. And I'm not sure how they're going to do that if they have this separation in the movies. It makes more sense to have maybe one movie focus on him and the next focus on him versus the heroes or something like that. It's going to be interesting to see how they juggle screen time.
Yeah, and I think that was even something when I think the Russos initially said they're going to retitle the films, that people would think, and then they'd even said that the part 1 is very much about Thanos and his journey and everything. And you can't, I don't see how Infinity War as a title really, signals, here's like, learn all this stuff about Thanos and his plan and how powerful he is, unless it's kind of, it ends with the war, or maybe Thanos is brought in earlier and he appears in like Thor Ragnarok at the end or something. It's a hard jump to make from knowing so little about Thanos that we know right now, as far as in the movie context, and then going and jumping into Avengers Infinity War, and he's this all-powerful, godlike creature that, wields the gauntlet, and he kills half of our favorite superheroes.
Well, maybe that won't be how it goes. Maybe in this context, Infinity War just means the struggle over the gems themselves, and Thanos doesn't actually get the gauntlet all assembled until the next movie.
So then maybe Avengers 4 is titled Avengers Infinity Gauntlet?
Something like that, maybe.
So, yeah, as you can tell, we don't really have that strong of a grasp on, what this future could hold for this movie. But there's plenty more for the MCU that's going to come. It's not going to end after Infinity War. Kevin Feige teased so after the panel as well, he said that he was asked about whether people are going to die or not in Infinity War, and he said that they kind of envision more of a rotating roster that is, more kind of embedded in the comics. Instead of people dying, people just kind of leave and then they come back, and they're just kind of the changing of the guard and whatnot. He also said that they have, quote, pretty firm plans for 2020, but then their plans for 2021 through 2025 are more up in the air. So it's like impossible to really speculate on what those movies could be exactly. But I mean, as a fan of these movies, obviously I really like how even though they're focused on what's happening currently, what's happening next, they're also making sure that they have stuff lined up for the future.
It does tie back into something Feige said a while back, pretty early on, where he suggested that with the Iron Man franchise in particular, they would just sort of James Bond it, that whenever one character or one actor got tired of the part and moved on, they just recast, which they've sort of already done with a few pretty key characters like Jim Rhodes and Bruce Banner.
And I also think this plan sort of means that, actors like Robert Downey Jr. are less likely to burn out on the characters. If he's just sort of disappearing and only coming back to do an Iron Man movie every 4 or 5 years, or to be an Iron Man cameo and occasional things, or, just sort of pop in, then maybe he'll be more energized about it and interested in staying with it.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you go ahead, Doug.
I definitely think that that's the case for some actors where, like Chris Evans, I think if he hadn't gotten the opportunity to take a break and direct a movie, he might not be as excited about continuing to play Captain America for as long as they'll let him. Because for a little while, I know he was saying, I might be done after Infinity War, and now he's saying, they'll have to pry the shield from my cold dead fingers.
I think a lot of that, also plays into Marvel's current, structure of their movies of taking the burden more off of one person and kind of spreading that around. I mean, that's one of the reasons they brought Robert Downey Jr. into Civil War, is so Chris had less of a burden. It was still his movie, but Iron Man still had half the screen time almost. And I think if they can continue to do that, continue to give actors breaks between, movies, I think they're going to be able to keep them longer. I mean, post Infinity War, they're going to be done filming Phase 3, at least the majority of the main characters, by this time next year. So that could give them a 2-year break between filming their next solo movie or something. And I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to keep actors fresh, going to keep them interested, and not feel so worn down by, the burden of constantly getting in shape, constantly being in these movies and doing press and everything. So the more breaks and the more help I think these actors can get in their own individual movies, I think that's the best way they can go about it.
Totally agree.
Alrighty. So then the kind of last bit of news from the Marvel Studios side of things is Feige was talking to coming soon again, and there's been a lot of questions about the Inhumans and what their future in this universe is going to be now that their movie does not have a release date, and we haven't heard any real updates on it prior to it actually being announced in 2014. And he said, quote, "We've announced through 2019, we have ideas through 2021. It sounds like the future, but it's not so far away. We're determining what we'll be doing then, and certainly Inhumans will be a part of that." So it seems, they've continually said that Inhumans is going to happen. It looks like a 2019-2020 release date is likely. How does this movie play in a post Thanos world? We can start with Brendan, go to Ben, Rhiannon, and then Doug.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things is looking at the current lineup for Phase 3. Is we've got 5 movies, I think, before Infinity War starts, and 2 of them, Black Panther and Spider-Man, are going to be fairly down to earth, self-contained stories from what we know. But then you've got Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, and good Lord, what am I forgetting? Oh, Thor Ragnarok. And all three of those are very weird cosmic stuff. A lot of the news we've gotten out of SDCC suggests that there's going to be a lot of weird things in those movies. Doctor Strange is, of course, doing all the weird extra-dimensional stuff and will probably introduce the idea of these extra-dimensional, incredibly powerful entities that he and the other wizards draw on for power, and many of whom are his key villains. And then you're going to have Guardians of the Galaxy is giving us Ego, the Living Planet, and God knows what else. I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg there. And I think the one that has the most interesting promise for the Inhumans is Thor Ragnarok. Again, that's a movie that's got a lot of weird stuff in it, giant fire demons, enormous cosmic wolves. But there was that strange line that's been, had some mixed reporting about it over the last week or so, where it was said there were Eternals glimpsed in the movie. And I think that might, to some extent, be laying the groundwork for the Inhumans, because it makes sense, I think, to put the Inhumans after Infinity War, because between these three movies I just mentioned and then Infinity War, Infinity War and then whatever the next one will be called, there's going to be a lot of focus on weird cosmic stuff in the MCU, and the Inhumans tie into that. So having a lot of that established first lays a lot of groundwork, I think, for the Inhumans.
I believe, Ben, you're next, if you have any thoughts.
Oh, sorry. I agree with all of that. I'm still very excited to see if we maybe get an Inhumans movie at some point. I'd rather have it sooner than later, considering they have so much of it set up from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. these past 2 seasons. And I feel like if they wait too long, that's almost going to become a waste, because if the movie was coming out here in a couple of years, like it was originally going to, the stuff on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would still be in our recent memories, even if the show wasn't still around at that point, which, to be honest, it probably won't. So, I mean, I feel like having both of them at the same time would have been great. But now that the Inhumans movie is getting pushed so far back, I feel like they might change something, or things are just it's going to be more complicated trying to get that set up in the MCU, since Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. won't really be there to do that. If that made sense.
Yeah.
Am I next?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Again, I agree a lot with what Ben was saying as far as the Inhumans being fresh, or if there is a big gap, show us some sort of progression that explains the big gap since we last saw the Inhumans. But yeah, nothing else really to add.
Okay. Doug, any final thoughts on an Inhumans movie?
No, I think you guys pretty much said it all, other than the fact that I think that the fact that Feige's still talking about it in any way is really encouraging. I think if Inhumans had been quietly canceled, we'd start to see him not use that word so often. So the fact that he's continually giving these reassurances that it's going to happen soon, I think that really kind of calms my fears about whether or not we'll actually see it.
Yeah, I agree. If it was something that was canceled, he would kind of be less reassuring about this movie, instead of being, oh yeah, it's certainly a part of our plans. He'd be like, we're still trying to figure things out with this movie, and we'll see if it happens or not. So it looks like Inhumans will happen at some point, probably early into Phase 4, but it could be a little different than I think we all anticipated when, Inhumans movies announced. There was rumors of Vin Diesel as Black Bolt, and if you have Black Bolt and their family, then you need Medusa and Crystal and Maximus and people at Lockjaw and Triton and every big well-known Inhuman, and there's not that many well-known Inhumans because the Inhumans are so much of a lesser known property, but yeah, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been introducing them slowly. They've been really heavily focused on them the last 2 years, really. And in an interview with IO9 showrunners Jed Whedon and Marissa Tancherone hinted, or well, they didn't hint. They said they're going to use quote classic Inhumans in season 4. So, do you think that maybe? I mean, like I don't think they're going to use Black Bolt or one of like the main kind of group of Inhumans, but could somebody maybe not sitting on the throne of the Inhumans, could they be popping up in the show? Do you guys have any ideas? We can go with Brendan, I guess, to start.
Well, there's probably there's that core group of like 5 or 6 of them that I would bet are pretty off limits. You've got Black Bolt, his wife Medusa, the character who's often been sort of like the point of view character for those groups called Crystal, and then there's a couple of others like Karnak and Gorgon. And all of those guys, I would imagine, are sort of set off in their own private little MCU bubble where no one's allowed to play with them. But other lesser-known characters, like, I don't know, Triton maybe, I'm not sure about Lockjaw, who's this giant dog-like Inhuman, because the thing about Lockjaw is that you could do him pretty much just through CGI, and you wouldn't need an actor, because that's the big limit of having them appear on the show first, because you've pinned it down to an actor, and then if the movie comes out later and they want to use that character, now they're stuck with this actor that the director may not have wanted for the role. Or the actor, if it's going to be as far off as they're saying is, the actor may just not be available anymore. But with Lockjaw, you could always just CGI in a big dog monster into either version.
Right. So, Doug, you have any classic Inhumans you think could pop up, or do you kind of scoff at this idea, really?
I don't scoff at it, but I mean, when I think classic Inhumans, the only ones that come to mind are the royal family, and I just can't imagine any of them showing up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I certainly wouldn't want them to show up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm not too happy that Ghost Rider's even showing up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
I like the show, but I think for big names, especially names that could require big budgets, let them get introduced in their own things. So yeah, if we see like Black Bolt or Lockjaw or Medusa show up, I'm not going to be too happy, even though I do really like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Okay, Rhiannon?
The only thing about the Inhumans and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then knowing we're going to have the Inhumans movie later, is, the crossover, between the movies and the TV shows. We're seeing less and less of that all the time. And would they, how much is left for the movies when we do stuff like that?
Right.
And will they share those characters? Will they share those actors? Stuff like that.
Yeah. So, Ben, do you have any thoughts about a classic Inhuman showing up on the show? Do you want more Inhumans?
I definitely still want the show to have Inhumans because I feel like it worked really well on the show, at least in my opinion. I don't know about the normal one, not the normal ones, the classic ones, because they're gonna, like you guys said, they're gonna require more of a budget, and they might also kind of feel a little out of place compared to what's there. Now, if the movie was coming out in a couple of years and the show was still going to be around in a couple of years, then I would absolutely love that. But as it stands right now, I don't think they should try that.
Yeah, so I think kind of the consensus is the idea of a classic Inhuman, could work depending on what your definition of a classic Inhuman is. Like, we don't anticipate Black Bolt showing up. And kind of going off of what you said, Ben, like if this movie was still happening and if it was coming out in 2 years or something, they already had an actor cast and that guy was coming into cameo real quick, then we would all be for it. But the idea of them casting somebody like Black Bolt or Gorgon or Medusa or anybody and then going and having them in the show, and then when the movie comes around then we don't get Black Bolt in the movie or something. Like, I don't care how big of a Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fan you are, like, you're going to want to see the best of the best Inhumans, you know, on the big screen. So that's the end of our Inhumans topic and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff. And we're going to end talking about some Netflix properties and kind of the possibilities of crossovers, or maybe not really. Because post Comic-Con, Clark Gregg was talking about how, because he's a huge Iron Fist fan, he wants to meet, you know, Finn Jones as Iron Fist in the show. He wants to be on the Netflix stuff as if he could, but he told the Nerd Machine that there's corporate stuff. That's what he said, that is keeping this kind of stuff from happening. They've constantly been using this phrase, it's all connected, and that, you know, this stuff can happen, but, you know, it seems like every couple of months we learn just how complex these deals really are, where it hinders, you know, not only creatively to put people from different shows into other shows, but it also is almost impossible because of, you know, contracts and figuring out with not just the actor schedules, but studios, and, you know, figuring out with how ABC would allow a character that they own the rights to, basically with Coulson, to appear in a Netflix show that they don't necessarily, that they're not associated with. So Rhiannon, I know you love the Netflix stuff, so, and I know we all love Clark Gregg. We'd love to see him appear, but this stuff just kind of puts a sour mood around the MCU, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really upset me. I was watching the video from Nerd HQ and saw that he said it and was really upset at what it means. Because one of those first things in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that everybody loves is, you know, this is that character that was in the Avengers, or, you know, in Iron Man, you know, coming in and being in this TV show. And they brought in Lady Sif, you know, all of that. Everything being connected is what makes the MCU really interesting and unique. And so in a way it was like really frustrating to hear that, you know, Coulson, I mean, it's sort of a relief as well that Coulson isn't going to pop up in the Netflix stuff. So at least at this point, as a viewer and as a fan, I'm not going to keep expecting to see him around every corner. At this point, I would just like references to the shows. There was a little thing in the ticker and at the end of the season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that had something about Hell's Kitchen fighting going on or something, but, you know, those references would be cool. But in a way, it just kind of felt good to have an answer that, okay, Coulson isn't going to pop up in Iron Fist, or Daredevil isn't going to pop up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It would be awesome if that happened, but right now it looks like it won't happen. So at least we can stop asking for it or hoping for it.
Right. So then this kind of opens up a bigger discussion, really, of, you know, you touched on it, that this is the model that Marvel has made, you know, with this MCU, and that everything's connected. These, you know, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. exists within the movie world, and so does, you know, the Netflix stuff. They all live in the same world, but if these crossovers can't really happen besides, you know, a simple ticker that says, oh, a brief mention of Hell's Kitchen, is this what we want, like, as fans? Like, I know it's cool to have the Avengers referenced in Jessica Jones or Daredevil, but if there's no chance of them actually appearing and, you know, basically being promoted to the big screen, would it almost be better for Marvel to just separate them almost entirely and say they kind of exist together, but there's no chance really of them ever actually crossing over? Doug, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that just because the characters won't meet each other doesn't mean that there's not value in having the worlds be connected. Like, I think that there are certain aspects of New York City as it exists in the Netflix shows that were set up in the Avengers or set up in the other movies. The people that try and kill Jessica Jones because they hate people with powers, or just Matt's cheap apartment rates. Just little world building stuff that I feel, even if the characters never interact, even if we don't see, President Ellis show up on the news in every single iteration of anything Marvel ever does, just little things that tie the world together makes everything feel richer and more complete to me. So yeah, even if the Defenders don't show up in Infinity War, even if Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. never has any impact on the movies, the fact that they're in the same world and can use each other's mythology to build on the completeness of the universe, for me, that just there's no downside to that. There's only upside.
Brendan?
I think the most interesting thing about it is the way Kevin Feige keeps saying that the only way they could have any cameos in the movies is if they were substantial roles or something to that extent. I can't remember his exact wording, but he seems very opposed to the idea of just very small appearances and references. It's interesting.
Yeah, and then Ben, do you want to see, like, obviously we'd want to see these crossovers, but if they don't happen, is that, lessen your overall enthusiasm for the MCU at all?
It makes me wish that they would go one way or another. Either just, do what the fans want, which is to, reference the Netflix shows, reference Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the movies, even if it's just like a quick one-liner. But if you're not even going to do that, then I feel like you don't need to do it at all. Because, looking at, the DC side of things, what they do works because they have two separate worlds, and it works. And Marvel, I've always loved the thought of having everything connected. But if you're not going to do it if you're not going to do it the right way, then it almost feels unnecessary.
Right. So that's where I think as fans of this stuff, we're not really expecting for, in Phase 4 for Luke Cage or Daredevil to be, one of the main pieces of the Avengers team. I think what we want most is just, basically glorified cameos or Easter eggs, just something that ties them together where they can kind of reassure us that, hey, this is actually working because, we can see a 5-second shot in Infinity War or whatever the fourth Avengers movie is going to be titled. We can see a single shot with all the Defenders fighting and it takes a day to shoot, or we see, and then it pans over and there's Quake doing something with Coulson, and it's just little things like those, like a single scene. I don't think, at least for me, I don't want to speak for you guys obviously, but I don't need to see Daisy be the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. and be giving orders to Tony Stark or Captain America. I just want to see some sort of reference to the Inhumans in the movies, or
just some sort of acknowledgement.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that was what frustrated a lot of fans about Civil War, was the lack of any reference to the Inhumans, the lack of any reference to whatever's going on in New York City with outside of Queens. Tony Stark notices Spider-Man, but not Daredevil and Jessica Jones.
Right. And it would be so... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go on.
It would just be so simple for them to have a throwaway line about how, people with powers are showing up in increasing numbers and all over the place and stuff like that. But from what Feige said, that's exactly the sort of stuff he doesn't want to have in the movies. It's very strange. I do... sorry, go ahead.
Just real quick. You look back to that final scene in Ant-Man where he's talking about, the guy that crawls on the walls. That would have been a golden opportunity to mention, right. And there's this guy in Hell's Kitchen, and there's these Inhumans. I can't remember if that was before Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. introduced them, but that is the kind of places where you could throw that in, but they just don't.
Right, and Civil War would have made the most sense because that movie had its entire focus being on there's too many of these people and you got to do something about them. I do wonder how much of this has to do with the conflict with Feige and Perlmutter, though, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
I mean, I think it's hand in hand. I mean, I think if Perlmutter's not there, basically supervising the TV side of things, I mean, Jeff Loeb has been pretty much on board for some sort of crossover. And I think Kevin Feige has continually said that, hey, yeah, we want it to happen, but it's just hard to do with scheduling and, we don't want to be a creative hindrance on, their shows by making them tell a certain story so it fits our stuff. But yeah, I think if Perlmutter's not there, I don't see how there's not some sort of single scene in a movie or a line of dialogue that mentions the defenders of Hell's Kitchen, or, the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. is back and it's, being run by a guy who was formerly killed in the movies. I mean, there's going to come a point, I think we're, rapidly approaching that, where it's kind of going to be a make or break thing. And I think if by the end of phase 3, if we don't have kind of some larger connective tissue to these movies, I mean, even looking at Civil War, the Registration Act had barely any effect on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And maybe it has an effect on Luke Cage, and we'll find out in a couple of months, but it doesn't appear that that's going to be like the kind of story that we're going to get. So,
well, it's what you're going to get as long as you have one guy in charge of TV and one guy in charge of movies, and they're basically separate divisions who don't really talk to each other that much. If one of them takes over the other in the future, maybe if Feige pulls the TV stuff under his umbrella too, maybe that'll change. But until then, I think we're just going to continue this sort of state of affairs.
Yeah, so it sucks that this probably isn't going to happen, and we're not going to see, crossovers between Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Netflix stuff, and then, the movies at some point. But as far as the Netflix stuff is concerned, we have an updated Netflix timetable, or a rough one, because at the Television Critics Association, Netflix revealed that we're not going to see, even though they've announced a 3rd season of Daredevil, a 2nd season Jessica Jones, The Punisher getting a spin-off solo series. They've announced all that stuff with no dates, and they've confirmed that we're not going to see that until after Iron Fist and Defenders, which likely means a 2018 for 2 of the 3 of those. So Rhiannon, you're the big, you're big on the Netflix schedule. You love that kind of stuff. So I know we talked last week about, whether or not this current schedule of, 6 months apart can work. Is this we kind of thought this was the case, but now that it's actually been confirmed, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this particular bit of news was non-news. It took the things that we've seen in development. We knew Luke Cage was next. We knew Iron Fist was filming right now, so we knew that's what we would see next. We've heard plenty of things about the Defenders getting ready to film. That's just the only gray area was sort of the Punisher, because it looked like Punisher could go ahead and start production. If they wanted to have 2 shows going into production at the same time, because we just don't know how much overlap the Punisher is going to have with any of our Defenders characters. So this at least gave us some Punisher's clarification that we're not going to see his show until after the Defenders. I think it was pretty obvious that we wouldn't get any more Daredevil or Jessica Jones until after the Defenders. Though I know you said that they had pushed the 2nd season of Daredevil, that Netflix had pushed for it to come faster than
Right.
Marvel really wanted. So I guess they could have shocked us by having the Daredevil season 3 come before all of this. But to me, it was a little bit of non-news in this particular order. And when it came out, I was just sort of like, okay, it's nice to have clarification, but what I really wanted is what we got later.
Right. And we can talk about that in a second. Does anybody else have any thoughts on, it basically being confirmed that we're not going to see these 3 shows until a post-Defenders world?
It's not too surprising.
Yeah. Doug or Ben?
No, I think it makes total sense.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah. So then that leads us into the last topic of the day, which was alluded to just moments ago, and that's at the TCS as well. Netflix head Ted Sarandos was talking about just how ready everybody is for more Netflix shows from Marvel, and that he said they're hoping to make these series quicker, but he doesn't want to. They're focused on maintaining the quality instead of just making them faster and having a 4-month gap instead of a 6-month gap in between shows. They want to make sure that if this happens and they can ramp up production, that they maintain this high level quality that they've put out so far with 2 seasons of Daredevil and a single season of Jessica Jones.
And that's the news I had been wanting, was just something away from that 6-month schedule. So even though they didn't tell us how frequently we're going to start getting things, it at least wasn't Feige coming, or Loeb coming back out and saying, 6 months. I'm just excited to have potential of something more frequent.
Yeah. So I guess the question for, the rest of you guys is, with them potentially moving away from 6 months and probably looking at doing closer to, 3 series or 3 seasons a year, when do you guys think that can happen? And I guess I'll start with Doug for this one.
I think 2018 makes a lot of sense for that to start. As the Netflix universe gets bigger and things start needing to happen a little quicker, I think there's a pretty good chance that Defenders will be the last thing we see in 2017. But then when 2018 hits, I think we'll get a new season of Jessica Jones, a new season of Daredevil, and The Punisher all in the same year, which would leave 2019 open for Iron Fist and Luke Cage to have new seasons, and then maybe one other thing as well.
Do you think it'll be in that order? Jessica, Daredevil, Punisher?
That's a good question. I think we'll see Jessica Jones season 2 before we see Daredevil season 3.
Yeah.
But I don't know where Punisher will fall into that.
Yeah, I guess the big question with the Punisher series is just how connected his story is with the rest of what's going on. Because if he does pop up in Defenders and then maybe he is scheduled to be in Daredevil season 3, then they're going to want maybe more of his story prior to him coming back once again in Daredevil. So Brendan, do you also agree that 2018 is probably likely for 3 Netflix shows a year?
I do. I also think there might be a chance the Punisher would be the first one. It'll depend a lot on if he does or doesn't show up in the Defenders. If he does, I could totally see them, he's got a significant role there and is a big fan favorite like he was in Daredevil season 2. I could see them easily saying, okay, Defenders is done. Here's what the Punisher has been up to. And then they sort of close that out and move on to Jessica Jones and Daredevil season 3. It's part of it's, these 4 shows leading up to Defenders season 1 have all been basically, we build up these characters and when we throw them together in this team, and they've had allusions to that happening in some capacity in all the show's seasons so far. I don't know. It's pretty unclear at this point if they're going to have a similar sort of end game for this next phase of the Netflix shows. Is after the first Defenders season, are we going to have each season of the other shows build up to another Defenders season? Will we keep doing it in phases, sort of mimicking the movie structure? I don't know. I do know that this is actually one of the, if they speed up the production as much as they've been talking about, that's definitely going to be a thing that will just compound the split between the movie and the Netflix and TV side of things, because they've said before one of their big problems is scheduling. How can we make sure we get the actors from the TV shows doing stuff when they're doing things so frequently and the movies are planned out so far and ahead. It's good. I'm going to be happy to get more of the Netflix stuff more often, but it does make that even less likely.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point with that. I think the main thing with the idea of a ramped up schedule possibly conflicting with, the possibilities of cameos or crossovers is I think it does come down to the studio heads for Kevin Feige to say, okay, listen, we have a rough idea for a possible cameo in Infinity War. So I know you guys are planning to do these 3 series that year, or these 2 series or whatever. If you can find a way to end those series, the ones that come out prior to our movie, in a way that leaves them open to a cameo, then that would be beneficial. Because otherwise, like you're saying, they would feel it one, be almost impossible to do for scheduling, but then 2, just in terms of how their character progression goes from the end of one season to a cameo and then going back into their season, I think would be tough. So then we can end it with Ben. What do you think about getting more Netflix shows a year?
I think 3 a year would be great because it's going to allow them to kind of expand the universe more, but I really don't have anything else really to add other than what you guys already put out there.
All right. So that's going to be it then. That's the some of the biggest news that came out regarding the MCU this week. We are hoping to keep this ongoing. If you liked what you heard, we are on iTunes and SoundCloud. Go subscribe to us on both of them. Give us a review on iTunes specifically. That'd really help us. Give us comments. I believe Nicole's going to put this up on YouTube again, so you can find it there with brief images about what we're talking about. I'm Cooper Hood. You can find me on Twitter at CooperMCUEX. Brendan, are you on Twitter?
Not at the moment, no.
All right. But Brendan will. Your Doctor Strange series is finished, right? Your Easter egg one. Yeah,
that one's done for now. I'm still working on what the next article will be.
Yeah, so stay tuned for the site for more from Brendan. Ben, you have anything you want to say?
Well, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at NexusBen. I am gonna try to help you guys out with the news this week. I have been very bad at doing that this past few weeks, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, I'm not currently on Twitter, but people have been asking where I am and what's going on with the YouTube channel. So stay tuned for news on that. That's coming soon. We haven't forgot about you guys. Sorry for the radio silence about MCUX and MCU Q&A, but there's going to be some news soon.
Yeah, so stay tuned to the the site. I'm sure there'll be an announcement. There might be a YouTube announcement or something. The official Twitter and Facebook pages and all that stuff. Rhiannon?
Everybody can find me on Twitter as Shot of Patron. And yeah, I'll be helping cover the news a little bit this week. I'm traveling a lot more, so I'm hoping Ben can help pick up things. I'm literally hanging up and hopping on a flight to Louisiana, so I'll either be helping with the news or hanging out on Bourbon Street. So you can guess where my priorities are.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, be sure to do what I said earlier. Go and subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a review. Be sure to check out MCUExchange.com daily. You can find articles for everything we covered today in this podcast, but a little bit more in depth, maybe, or structured. And then we're on Twitter at the MCU Exchange. We're on Facebook as MCU Exchange. I believe we're on Tumblr as well. So we're on basically all social media platforms. You can find us by searching MCU Exchange. Hopefully you guys like this new episode, and we will hopefully be back soon to continue to discuss all the latest news regarding the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.